couple prominent attorneys on with us today to specifically talk about the Eaton fire and their mass tort that they have. So this will be really informative, I think, for some of you that were impacted, and all of us just learning about this, I think will be really good. AOA, we've been around for over 40 years. Thank you. I know many of you are members with us. And for those of you that are in the Pasadena area, we do have an in-person doubleheader coming up on March 28th. And we'll have landlord-tenant attorney Mike Brennan that will be speaking about Measure H specifically. So that specifically relates to you, and we look forward to seeing you there on that. And anyway, just want to make sure that you're aware that we update our forms regularly, and you should be using the newest lease, the newest legal forms. So definitely get those fresh off of the AOA website when you log in as a member. And anyway, just want to make sure you're doing that. And great, we're going to go ahead and get started here. And today, this live stream is sponsored by McNicholas and McNicholas, Becker Law Group, and Singleton Schreiber Injury Attorneys. So these three different companies. And you'll, as we get into this, you'll understand the reason why these three companies are coming together to make this live stream possible. And we were going to have Patrick McNicholas with us, and he was unable to join us today. He's on his way to Monterey, I believe, and working on things there. So his associate, an associate at McNicholas and McNicholas, Brandon Castor, is with us today. So thank you for joining us. And then also we have Todd Becker, who's the principal at Becker Law Group, who's on this live stream with us. He's a longtime Pasadena resident, seasoned attorney. He's secured over 15 billion, that's billion with a B, in settlements for thousands of wildfire victims, including those affected by the Creek, Camp, Dixie, and Mosquito fires, and is widely recognized for his expertise in mass tort litigation and clear communication. So guys, it's really great to have you on today. And Todd, if you could just kick this thing off and give us kind of an introduction, and that would be great.
Thank you, Jeff. We appreciate the opportunity to be on your show today and to talk to the members of the Apartment Owners Association. So, just to give a little background on the three firms, basically the three firms, Becker Law Group, which is my firm, McNicholas and McNicholas, which Brandon is an associate, and also Singleton Schreiber. The three of us together have done approximately 45,000 fire cases, which I believe is more than anybody else on planet Earth. And that includes cases in California, Hawaii, and our partner Jerry has done cases in New Mexico and Colorado as well. We probably have about 20% of all the cases in Hawaii in the Lahaina fire. We did a large portion of the cases in Paradise that burned down, as well as Woolsey, Thomas, and just the list goes on and on. Unfortunately, we're in an environment where there's way too many fires. The difference between this fire and all those other fires for me is that my office is here in Pasadena. My house is down the road. I sustained about $150,000 worth of damage indirectly from the fire myself at my home. And I have a lot of friends and colleagues that have lost their homes in this fire. So this one is very personal. I like to say it's the case I didn't want, but maybe the most important case I've ever had, because it's so personal and there's so many people that I know that have been affected. Between here and the Palisades, it's really the biggest loss in U.S. history. I mean, we're looking at in Altadena, we have about 63,000 homes that were burned down, over 9,000 structures, including homes and apartment buildings, and as well as office buildings that have been burned down, and over 11,000 structures either burned or damaged in Altadena. Why is that important? There's not going to be enough insurance to take care of all of this. You know, the problem is over time, the insurance has not kept up with the amount of cost to rebuild. And that goes for houses as well as apartment buildings. And, you know, mostly we're seeing people have insurance of about 25% of what they need to be able to be fully compensated. And so we kind of look at that as bucket number one. And what that's true, whether you're living in a house or you're an apartment owner and you own an apartment building, you have insurance on that apartment building. You're not going to have enough money to be adequately compensated. We're looking right now at prices because you have the combination of here and the Palisades, and we may have some tariff issues going on with Canada in the future on lumber. We're looking at an issue of maybe paying $1,000 a foot to rebuild. And at $1,000 a foot, you know, people are way underinsured, much more than they would normally be in the best of times. And I would like to say these are kind of, unfortunately, the worst of times. So that being said, if somebody has, let's say you have a 40-unit apartment building and you get 25% coverage by your insurance, you really need us to come in and go after Southern California Edison for the balance. So what does that look like? Well, right now, we have done a lot of investigation. We've been suing Southern California Edison. We represent right now well in excess of 4,000 individuals. That includes homeowners, renters, and building owners, whether that's apartments or office buildings. And so we have the largest group probably in this case. We're all three firms are in leadership on this case. And therefore, you know, we're well situated to represent people in the fire. So looking at it from an apartment owner's perspective, you know, what are your losses? Obviously, your losses are you need to rebuild the structure. That's obvious, right? And so if you only have 25% or maybe 50% coverage on your building, and I've talked to apartment owners who have zero coverage. So the bottom line is they really need us to go after Southern California Edison. Our evidence right now looks very strong. I mean, you had the CEO of Edison come out and say, well, the wind wasn't strong enough to warrant turning off the lines up in Eaton Canyon. Well, the winds that night, because I'm local here, were 100 miles an hour. If that's not strong enough, I have no idea what is, because it was like a hurricane. And I've been in some pretty strong winds, including hurricanes in the Caribbean, and I don't recall anything stronger than that, you know. So that's number one. Number two, loss of rents. Now, a lot of these policies, insurance policies will cover loss of rents, but again, what I see in the policies I've seen is that although they do cover loss of rents, they're going to be woefully inadequate to adequately cover the loss of rents. We're talking about probably a 5-year period to rebuild apartment buildings, especially larger buildings. And so if you're looking at a 5-year period with no rents and maybe minimal coverage in terms of rental replacement income, but the insurance, that is again a category that we're going to need to go after Southern California Edison for. How are we going to get all this money? A lot of people ask us, they say, basically, isn't this going to put Southern California Edison out of business? Well, we had a fire in the Camp Fire and the North Bay fires in 2017 and 2018. And those fires ended up being about 70,000 victims in those fires and some smaller related fires. In that situation, PG&E, who's the equivalent of Southern California Edison for Northern California, did file Chapter 11 bankruptcy. In the end, we got a great result. And I think you alluded to it, Jeff. I mean, basically, we got a result of about $15 billion in that case, which really was the biggest wildfire recovery in history. But after that, we got together with the state of California and with the utility companies in the state of California. We put together Assembly Bill 1054. Assembly Bill 1054 set aside money specifically for recovery in utility-caused wildfires only in the state of California, Like for instance, Hawaii, they don't get to tap into that fund. And the Palisades, which was not caused by utility companies, does not get to tap into that fund. So that fund is essentially primarily only for Altadena residents and Pasadena residents, and also apartment owners and and office owners. So that being said, that fund has about 12 billion sitting in it right now. The first billion would come out of Southern California Edison's pocket. That would be their deductible essentially against that AB 1054 money. We think that AB 1054 will be fully replenished up to about $16 billion in 2 to 3 years. That being said, there should be enough money where Southern California Edison will not go bankrupt as a result of this fire. And there should be enough money to make all of you whole, even if you lost a large apartment building and even if you had no insurance or little insurance. So that's the good news. I mean, the bad news is we're looking at probably at least 2 to 3 years to get this money. So in the meantime, what do? Well, you get 100% of your insurance money, number one. Number two, I really recommend getting SBA money if you can, because it's low interest money and it'll help you maybe start the rebuilding process. So between your SBA money and your insurance money, hopefully that'll be enough money so you can start the rebuilding process. You may not be able to start rebuilding until after we settle the case in 2 to 3 years. So you're also, so as I said before, you're gonna need us to get you money for rents that are lost. You're gonna need us to get money for also for the loss of your structure. So that all being said, you also, all of your tenants that are renting from you all have their own case. What are their cases for? They had to evacuate. So they have an emotional trauma case. They lost their community. They had to evacuate. Most of their schools are gone. All the retail is gone. You know, a lot of times they have PTSD and so forth. So they have their own case. They also have their own case because they were displaced. And they're going to need alternative living. And a lot of times that alternative living is going to be way more expensive than the apartment that you were renting them. And so your tenants all have their own case as well. So tenants have their case, homeowners have a case, and landowners have a case. So that's kind of a good overview. Jeff alluded to the fact that this is a mass tort, not a class action. What's the difference between a class action and a mass tort? So in a class action, everybody gets treated the same. You know, when you get that check in the mail for $1.52 and you have no idea why your bank sent it to you, that is a perfect example of a class action. The only ones who make out well in that situation are the attorneys. This is a mass tort, which means every individual and every business owner has their own individual case. And having your own individual case, we're going to tailor your case to your specific losses and your specific needs and make sure that you get compensated for the losses that you sustained. What does our fee structure look like? First of all, we only get paid if you recover. If you don't recover, we don't get anything. And it says so in our agreement. And the other thing I did in our agreements was, because I'm local and because I have so many people that I know, whether it's apartment owners or friends who lost their home or renters or other business owners, this is personal, and we lowered our fee in this case down to 25%. I know there's some car accident attorneys out there who all of a sudden overnight magically became fire attorneys who have no idea what they're doing, but they're charging 40, sometimes 45, 50%. So they're charging way too much money. They have no idea what they're doing. They're not in leadership. They won't know how to get the case to the finish line. There are a handful. We're not the only people who know what we're doing. There are a handful of people who do know what they're doing. And it's really important that whether you go with us or another firm, that you pick a firm that has substantial wildfire experience, knows how to get these cases to the finish line, knows how to build out the case, and knows how to get you fully compensated for your loss. Brandon, I'm going to turn that over to Brandon Castor. Brandon, is there anything you'd like to add to what I've said before we turn it over to Jeff to add to and some questions from the listening audience?
No, I think you did a great job covering the broad strokes of everything. The one thing I'll add is a part of structural loss is other real property losses. Obviously, your landscaping, your hardscaping, anything on the land that you own, that is also recoverable in this lawsuit, if not fully compensated by your insurance. But I think you covered everything. So if there are any questions or from anything else.
Great. Yeah. So if you're watching from AOAUSA.com, there's the blue help button down at the bottom. You can ask a question there. Put in a question, and Maria will get that over to us. And same thing with Facebook and YouTube. Go ahead and put your questions in. One question that we've received a lot is, what are the responsibilities for a rental property owner here when there's been a total loss? There's a lot of different, depending on what's happened there's a lot of different questions, but we can just start with the total loss. It's been red tagged. What's their responsibility towards the tenant in that kind of situation?
Well, a lot of it's going to depend on your lease agreement, right? And what is, because these are contractual relationships. So a lot of it's going to depend on what that contractual relationship looks like. I mean, generally speaking, if you have a total loss, that person is going to have to seek other place to live. And a lot of it's going to depend on the contractual relationship and what the contract says. And so I think I would look to the contract or the lease agreement, first of all, and making that determination as to what responsibilities you have. I think the more sticky situation is when you have not a total loss. When the building is still standing and you have some soot and ash issues, or you have some building damage issues, and you have some remediation that needs to be accomplished, and the person is still there's still a lease. In that situation, number one, is it habitable? I think you need to make a determination whether it's habitable. And I think one of the things that's important is to make sure you get adequate testing done. And in doing adequate testing, we need to test for things like asbestos and lead and benzene and other chemical things that could be harmful to tenants. And I think that is an area where I see potential problems for landlords. I think you can't be too hasty about pushing your client to go back in there, your customer to go back in there, your tenant, because you don't want to put them in a dangerous situation. And in that situation, you may have some obligation to house them somewhere else if they can't live in your unit, if your unit is still standing. You certainly don't want them going back in there too soon, because you may get sued later on if they have any health issues. So I think that is probably the more concerning situation, because there are those islands of buildings still standing, whether they be residential units that are being rented out by landowners or whether they're apartment buildings. I think that's probably a little bit more difficult call, but I think I always err on the side of caution and not trying to. I've seen landlords trying to push their tenants back in too soon. I just think that is a potential disaster for a landlord, that they're going to get sued because they're worried about they're not getting rent, so they want to get them to go back in there and pay rent. So I look at that as being more problematic. Brandon, anything you want to add?
I think that covers the majority of it. In the total loss, I think you're right. Typically, unless the renter, which would be very atypical, continues to pay rent, that lease is usually broken at that point. And I would assume there are usually no duties that, continue. But as Todd described, it's when it's not, looking to your lease agreements becomes important.
Right. Yeah. So it sounds like, Todd, just to respond to what you said there, it sounds like maybe there are some best practices that you could advise landlords on before they're letting their renters in. So it sounds like you're saying that you should have testing for lead, asbestos, benzene, at least? What other is there kind of like are those the only three things they should test for? Or are there other things?
Well, Army Corps, thank you. Army Corps right now is only testing for asbestos, and now we've realized there's a lot of lead up there. You have a lot of structures that are built in the 20s, 30s, and 40s up there.
Right.
I think
Yeah.
the apartment buildings are probably built a little bit later than that, but even in the 40s and 50s, you still have maybe not so much lead, maybe a little bit of lead, but maybe more so asbestos issues, right? And I think certainly asbestos and lead. I don't know about benzene. That might be the plaintiff attorney in me that's saying that, but I think at least asbestos and lead I would be testing for. So I think those are probably the most important things.
Okay. And I know that a lot of the landlords did a lot to clean the outside of the building. The renters, lots of times they have the renter's insurance and they would file a claim with the insurance company and get some things done on the inside of that unit. If it's taken on the smoke damage, what's the best way to handle that between
Well, most of the time, mostly I'm finding that the renters, either they don't have insurance or their renter insurance is really wholly inadequate.
Yeah.
And I also think, it's kind of a insurance coverage issue here, but when something comes from the outside and infiltrates the inside, you could argue that it's the external insurance policy that is obligated on it, not just the inside one, because if you have if something happens on the inside, like a water leak on the inside causing damage, that seems like a clear situation where it's the interior policy. But if you have an exterior cause, then there is some debate as to which policy is covering it and so forth. I just think it's not necessarily the landlord's obligation to clean the inside, but I'd be very hesitant to have tenants going back in there when the insides are not clean. It's a very tough call because these things can get expensive also.
Right. Yeah, 150. I mean, for your house to be in there, just 150,000 worth of damage. Lots of times it can be, it could be $1 million just as easily, just for remediation.
Yeah, well, I'm down in Pasadena. What happened with me is I had soot and ash build up on my roof of my building. It's a 4-story building. It's a 4-story townhouse, and the water came up. We had a rain about 3 weeks after the fire, and it washed all that soot and ash onto my balcony, blocked all the drains, and then all the water went into the house because there's vents. It all came in through the vents, and it went all 4 stories all the way down, ruining all the flooring, the ceilings, the insulation, the lights, everything as it went all the way down. So
gotcha. Okay.
It can build up fast.
So what other suggestions? We do have some questions here that we'll get to, but just quickly, what other suggestions would you have for owners? Like you said, don't get them put back in there too fast. Like take your time on it, do the testing. What else would you say are ways, maybe that ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. What are some other things maybe that they could possibly do to make it?
Well, I think one thing is if you're in the middle of a burn scar and your unit is standing or your apartment building is still standing, which happens because they're a little bit newer structures, they're less likely to burn sometimes than some of the older bungalow style houses in Altadena. You may want to wait till all your neighbors are clean before you have your tenants go back in, because the problem is you may clean your lot and then the wind comes up and it blows all the soot and ash from your neighbor's yards onto yours. And so you're put in a position where it may be contaminated again. So that's something to consider location wise, where you are before you make a decision on when you're going to bring your tenants back in there. But I think those are the main issues I would say. I certainly think, going forward, I would be checking my insurance coverage and making sure I have adequate coverage. I think, like I said, most people don't have adequate coverage. And the other thing I would do is if your unit burned down, I would not stop paying my insurance. If you
Right.
stop paying your insurance, you may not be able to get new insurance very easily later. So I think continuing to pay your insurance, continuing to pay your mortgage are very important things, because otherwise you might have a problem later on. The other thing is, if you have a loan on your building, and you have a loan at a decent rate, like let's say your loan is at 2%, 3%, one of these loans that we all got, a few years ago before rates jacked up, you probably want to keep making the mortgage payment if you can. Because otherwise, if you pay that loan off, you may not have adequate funds to rebuild, or you may have to take a loan out, which is at a much higher rate. So that is an important, and everybody has to make their own decision on that. But that's something to really take into account before you decide to pay your loan off.
Right. And we didn't make the disclaimer before, but none of this is legal advice. These are general best practices that we're talking about, and
Correct.
everybody's situation is
Yes,
going to
we're
be
just
different.
going over the issues, and exactly.
Right.
These are best practices, and it's obviously a case by case basis also, because it just, if you have a huge mortgage at a really high interest rate, and you have no income coming in for several years, people are going to have to do what they have to do. They're going to have to make a business decision. And, obviously we can't take into account, as we talk here, every individual circumstance either.
All right. So here's a question from Jackson on YouTube. If someone who was involved in the Eaton fires wanted to rent one of your units, but they only make 1.5 times the rent and their credit is bad, do you have to accept them, or can you decline their application? And I'll take this one because you guys are more on the fire. I don't know if you have rental property or are familiar with the laws.
Yeah, this
But
is kind of now, that's outside of my zone, so I appreciate
yeah.
you taking that one. Yes.
Yeah, so we're not going to really we're not going to take legal questions on this one, but you have a right as an owner to set rental criteria. And this YouTube channel, AOAUSA.com, you could type in nightmare tenant, and we have a video about how to avoid the nightmare tenant. And so, yeah, there's rental criteria as far as a credit score. Usually we would advise like 3 times the rent instead of 1.5 times. There's zero cushion. That's going to be very stressful for them. Even if you're doing them a favor, you're setting them up for failure. So there's a lot there, applications, how to do that. And so we do have a lot of videos, but also there's forms that you need. And so it sounds like maybe you have a single family home that you're renting out. There's a whole lot involved, and things are not that simple as anymore. So definitely you can become a member. It's $97, and that's for the whole year. You get access to all of the forms, and you can call in and ask questions even. So anyway, that's what I would recommend for you. But on to the next question here. On YouTube, would you recommend tenants sign release of liability prior to returning?
If a client is insistent on coming back and you're kind of hesitant to have them come back, I don't think it's a bad idea in that situation, that they are, coming back under their own free will. You're not forcing them to come back. I don't think it's a bad idea to have something along that line.
Great. And I thought that was interesting that you mentioned, what was it, SB 1054 or AB 1054, that there's money there for people. I think for the Eaton fire, I think that's really good for people to understand that, and for owners even to point their renters to you, because you're going to be able to get money for the renters as well as for the owners. Correct.
And even people that were evacuated, let's say you were working up there and you were evacuated. Let's say you have an employee that was a maintenance person and they got evacuated, they would have a case. And they would also have a case if they were like a manager of the apartment and lost their job as a result of it. They would have a case for that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a whole lot there that can be done, and there's money in the state there for it. So that's really good information. Let's see. I don't see any other questions right now. What just any other tips that you would give to the owners?
I would just, be very cautious. I think rebuilding, first of all, rebuilding makes a lot of sense. If people are thinking about selling their land versus rebuilding, if you sell, you get the difference in value the day before the fire and the day after the fire. But if you rebuild, you get the difference, you get the entire rebuild cost, could be a lot
Right.
at $1,000 a foot to rebuild. So your ROI is much better by rebuilding than by selling and walking away.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, my jaw just about dropped when he said it's $1,000 a square foot, I mean, we're used to hearing numbers more like $350, like if it's an ADU, new construction's about 100, like 350 or something. So wow, that's incredible.
Well,
That
we're also not looking at today. We're projecting out a year when people are actually going to be able to build. And we're also looking at the challenge of materials and labor between here and the Palisades to rebuild both. Because even though they don't get the AB 1054 money, and even though they don't get to sue Edison, they're still going to be rebuilding. And, we're thinking the Palisades could be $2,000 a foot to rebuild out there, because they're probably going to be building with maybe more expensive materials and so forth out there.
wow. Wow. All right. Well, we really appreciate you guys. And Brandon, before we sign off here, is there any comments that you'd like to make?
No, I just to thank everyone for their time, obviously, and I hope that our contact information is available. If people are on the fence or want more individualized attention, right? Or you have specific questions about your nuanced situation, we're obviously happy to, take those calls and give you any information, whether or not you end up signing up with us, obviously, but you can bring those specific questions to us and we can discuss further.
And you're in Porter Ranch. Is your office in Porter Ranch as well?
The McNicholas office is in Los Angeles, basically Westwood, Wilshire in the 405 across from UCLA. But Todd's office is, like he mentioned, he's right in Pasadena on Cordova Street.
Yeah, right there.
You can virtual, Zoom, phone call, come in person, any way works for either of us.
Yeah, I
Great.
mean, the reality is, I'm here at 388 Cordova,
Please.
on the corner of Cordova and Los Robles. I'm kitty corner from the Hilton Hotel. So we're very local for people if they want to come in.
And your phone number there, it's 626-654-2779. Is that right?
No, it's 626-777-7700 is my phone number at the office.
Okay.
And I do one crazy thing, Jeff, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
And that is I give out my cell phone to 100% of the people. So that number is 562-708-1111.
Okay. There we go. Can you repeat? And you guys, you can always take this video and go backwards, but could you repeat that one more time, please?
Sure. It's 562-708-1111.
Okay. Pretty easy there. All right. Well, I appreciate you guys taking the time. I mean, I'm really, really glad that we're able to just have attorneys of your caliber here and just letting our members know about it. I'm probably going to, I'll just say I'm going to probably send out an additional email, and hopefully everybody will learn about it, you guys, and just what you're possibly able to do for them.
Well, thank you for the time and allowing us to talk to your members. It's very humbling for us to represent our community.
Yeah. So I appreciate you. I mean, even going down on your percentage there like that for the community and everything, it's pretty cool as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the time, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys.